I didn't know if that was the case.
Last question. Talk to everybody in general about how this can feed papers.
Can I go?
Yep.
Okay. I did my project over the guides that work in Chichen. The research problem being conducted is a study of tour guides in Chichen Itza, specifically about why they work as tour guides and how they identify themselves with the archaeological site. It also includes how they became tour guides and what their job actually entails. Currently, there are 3 different groups of tour guides with 76 guides total working in Chichen, and this project aims to find out what characteristics from each group attract potential guides and why one would be preferred over the other, whether it be political, economic, family associated, or other reasons. This study consists of people living in peace today and includes tour guides currently working and those who no longer work so that they can be compared and contrasted. The interviews that I've had so far I've only had like 15 questions that I've asked them because I've been pretty lucky with my interviews, and that like my questions that I've asked have like stemmed to like conversations rather than like very structured interviews. And from what I've learned, because I interviewed Victor all day and then I interviewed his brother. They're both tour guides. They both have very different views on how they do their jobs. Like Victor works in Chichen because he worked there since he was 15, but he's been a tour guide for 20 years, and he's been a tour guide because he feels that he can identify like with his Mayan heritage, and that he's using that as kind of a means to spread his culture and help himself identify with it. But after like I kind of talked to him, because he won't, like he had a little bit of a conversation about that with me, but then like when you kind of like let them lead the conversation so that you can get out what they want to talk about, he really kind of just wanted to talk about the whole politics of the whole situation. That's the problem that I've kind of been having with my interviews so far, and I need to have more interviews. I was supposed to have 2 yesterday, but I kind of had half of one because I interviewed someone that I took the tour with, and he didn't really seem too interested in being interviewed, and it was like 10 minutes long. But like the conversations have really been very political, and that's like the main problem that I've been having so far. That because as of right now, like the government of the Yucatan bought Chichen 2 months ago in April. And since then there's been a lot of problems going on because the government basically wants to employ the guides, employ the vendors, employ the merchants, like employ everyone that works there under the government salary rather than how they function right now. And so the guides have kind of been collaborating together and to form like one big group rather than the 3 groups that they have now, but I'll talk about that later. So my main forms of fieldwork have been interviews and participant observation, and I've taken 2 different tours in Chichen. One was with one of the groups, and that was in Spanish, and that was long, and I know that I have a lot of information there, but I've only translated like 35 minutes of it because it's taking forever, and it's like 4 hours long. And then another tour was in English, and I haven't transcribed it because I kind of knew, I mean, I could understand it obviously, so I didn't have a big problem with that one. And so far from what I've learned from my tour with Isario, which was in Spanish, which was with the tour group that came through here, he started off his tour by saying, like, it's different how they start off their tour, and I think that that's a good indication of how they like actually feel about the site, rather than like if they look at it as like a way to make money, or if they look at it as like a part of themselves and them being able to talk about how they feel and how they relate to the site. And Isario started out his tour by explaining like what it meant to him and how like the site, and because he talked about the Castillo and how it was all a big calendar, and then he kind of went into explain the number systems in Maya, and I thought it was really interesting because he explains it as, because like if you know the number system in Maya, like there are 4 dots that like 1 dot represents a number, like 1, 2, 3, 4, and then they have a bar for 5. And depending on the level, you multiply it by 20, so then the numbers get higher. And he relates that to the language, in that like the language has one syllable per word, and that the combination of syllables and where they are in context like relates to the number system too. And why are you giving me that face?
It's not to you. It's with his explanation.
Oh. Well, I thought it was interesting.
Yeah, go on. Tell me. Don't stop.
I thought it was interesting how he related that, and that he would be able to put two and two together because he knew the language so well and that he knew the history of the site so well. But then my tour with Fernando, like he started, and his was in English, and he started out by like explaining to everyone like where to buy sunblock and where to buy water and where to buy sunglasses and all the things that you're gonna need for the tour. And it was just very like, this is how I'm gonna make my money basically. And then it was kind of interesting because at the end of the tour we went all the way around, and we never went to the cenote, which was interesting to me because we visited the Castillo twice, and we never went to the cenote or that area. And then we went to the observatory. Like he stopped and like sat everybody down, like made sure that he had their attention, like sat them in the shade where there was like places to sit, and like handed out like little papers on your name in Maya and like on a necklace, or like this is how you can put like your birth date or your anniversary date or whatever you can have in Maya. And I learned later that he gets, and like the thing, like one necklace is like $35 and he gets $20 for every necklace that he sells for it. So like throughout the whole tour, like it just kind of like, and the information that he presented was legitimate and it did match a lot of information that Isarios presented, but there was always that essence of like, this is a job that I'm not actually doing this because I care about my job, which was interesting to me. In my interview with Victor, he didn't let me record, but it was in English, so I got most of it, but it was still pretty hard. And he told me a lot about the politics of everything, and that he works in Chichen, and that helps him identify with his culture. But he also like brought up the fact that like he could have married anybody because he speaks like 8 different languages, and that he could have married anybody that came by, but he chose to marry a woman that spoke Maya and a woman that would like raise his children how he wanted to in a Maya culture. And then my tour guide, the meeting that I went to, because Fernando took me to the meeting for the tour guides that they had, and it was the first time that they'd all been in one place together ever, because the groups don't usually like to associate with each other. And since the government bought Chichen Itza from the Barcachanos in April 2010, they have been pushing for policy reform regarding not only the guides, but also everyone working within the archaeological zone. And it was the first time that all of the tour groups were together in the same place, and they were discussing the idea of one large group instead of their current 3 smaller groups in order to be able to keep the jobs they have and not become government employees. The government wants to, in order to be a tour guide now, and everyone that I've talked to, like you have to go to Merida. You can either study for 6 months or you can study for 3 years. Most people study for 3 years, but then you get like your license to become a tour guide, and you don't have to pick a specific area. Like you can basically guide all over like the Yucatan and all over like the peninsula, in Chichen or in Tulum or in Ekbalam. But most of those guides don't have contracts and don't want contracts because their job and their schooling like doesn't limit them to one specific place. So like most of them work in Chichen because it's a stable job and you can make money there, but you're not limited to there. So they're all pretty unhappy with what the government wants to do because they want to lower their salaries too. And at the meeting there was a lawyer, and he read off Mexican laws concerning the guides at Chichen and how they can use the laws to their advantage. So I'm not 100% sure who hired the lawyer, and I asked a couple of different people and nobody really knew. But basically at the meeting, like before they all voted in, so like now there's a new president, a new vice president, and a new secretary, and a new treasurer, and they're all from all the different groups. So like they're basically combining. They haven't officially done it yet, but that's what they're working on right now. And when I interviewed Ilario yesterday, which was a really terrible interview, and I kind of want to talk to him again, but I don't know how interested he is. he told me that he thought of his work at Chichen as another job. Like it didn't help him identify with his heritage, and he didn't really care about it a whole lot. And that he believes that most of the people living in Yucatan identify with the Maya heritage even if they don't work at Chichen. And he believes that no matter what city they live in, people here still identify with their culture. And then after my meeting, I kind of just talked to him a little bit, and because he asked me, well, we started talking about the politics, and then he asked me what I knew about it, and he seemed really interested in what I knew, and he wasn't at the meeting, and he had me explain to him everything that I knew about it, and he seemed really interested in what I knew, and then he never really responded with what he knew. So I don't really know what happened, but I know that everybody that I've talked to so far is just really interested more in that than talking to me about what my project is about. So I don't know. And that's about it. I don't feel, with all the information that I have so far, I feel like I'm really close to grasping this epiphany, but I haven't quite hit it yet. So I'm having a lot of trouble with my project, but I hope that with a couple more interviews that'll come. And it's also difficult for me because I'm not technically an anthropology student. I've only ever had one intro anthropology class, and I'm just a history major. So this is all really interesting for me because what's going on right now, even with my project, but also with this side of information that I'm getting with all the politics involved, it's basically history in the making. The Barbachanos owned Chichen for so long, and it was such a it was just a private piece of land for so long, and now the government's coming in and trying to change everything and trying to make it this big, almost I want to call it an amusement park, because they want to put a museum in Yaxina or Chocum Beach, and they want to put a fake beach by the archaeological zone, and it's just it's interesting for me because I can participate in it now. So that's my project.
Questions?
You mentioned a few different times the 3 different groups. Mm-hmm. What are the 3 different groups?
Okay.
What are they based on? Why don't they like to associate?
That's the thing, is initially I thought that the 3 different groups were legitimate groups, and they were different agencies that the program worked for, and they're not. You can either work for these 3 different groups, which are just people coming together that wear the same outfits that charge the same rate, or you can be a freelance guide and just not be part of a group and still do what you do. There's nothing to them, and that's the thing. One of them works at a hotel, but then one group stands at the bottom of the stairs, and the other group stands at the top of the stairs. There's no group, they don't have names, they don't have anything. It's really strange. It's a really weird concept.
You mentioned that they don't like to associate with each other. Do you know why that is, or is it just?
I think it's just because the politics of everything that they've just been. Because I know that the oldest group that they have, and that's the one that Victor works for, doesn't like the newer groups because for instance in the group that Fernando works for, he thinks that they don't have papers basically. Victor went to school for 3 years in Merida to become a tour guide, and he thinks that the people in the group that Fernando works for kind of bought their papers, and that's why they have to stand at the bottom of the stairs and charge a higher rate, because they need to make all their money back for buying their papers rather than actually just going to school. It's politics of it.
I know you said that you've mentioned to me that you've talked with the 3 all days, and they all work for different tour groups. Can you explain that? Why is that?
Okay, Victor worked as a freelance guide for 13 years, and then he joined a group that he works for now, basically because they offered him a job. They asked for him to be in that group. I haven't really translated my other tours or my other interviews yet, so I'm not 100% sure. One of them is a freelance guide. Ilario is a freelance guide. And he has a lot of other jobs besides just working. I'm not sure if he doesn't want to work for an agency, but I have no idea about Ilario. My interview was short, and I just had yesterday, and I haven't even put it on my computer yet.
So the three groups do have some sort of
Affiliation,
officiality. I mean, you get hired into them. They
Kind
offer you
of.
a job.
Yeah, and they give you a uniform. There's no like there's no like office for them. There's no like phone number. There's no. It's just. Can you include the salary?
No infrastructure?
No, not at all. The usual rate for a tour is $600. And depending on language, if it's like a common language like Spanish or English or German or whatever, and then like only one or two people speak, then it's a little bit more expensive. Also, guides will charge less, like a group kind of looks like they would, you know what I mean? Like they kind of look like they don't know what they're doing, they're trying to take advantage of it. Or if they know a group that's touring, they'll usually charge less. But a lot of them make their money by, well, I know that at least Fernando does, and I'm sure that more do, but I need to do more interviews with them as well. But there's no salary, no.
So the groups don't pay them anything?
No, there's no like check that they get weekly.
Okay.
There's just an exchange of money, like here's 600 pesos.
Do they keep that all 600?
I think so. Because they don't have, like it's just, they're individual guides that are working in groups together, but it's each their job.
How many guys will they do again? I'm sorry, go ahead.
So it's kind of like they're coming together, agreeing together.
And agreeing on a rate.
So that maybe like, you know, if people have other friends that are going to come down to Chichen Itza, oh, use this group's really good. And then they know that everybody in that group, like one of them is going to get that tour. So they try to come together as a group.
How many tours a day can a guy do?
Usually they do one or two. For 600 pesos, the tour usually lasts anywhere between 2.5 hours. And most guides don't work 8-hour days at Chichen because it's super hot.
What about